So let's see. I adopted Abby in February of 2017. She was part of a huge hoarding case that the Arizona Humane Society intervened on. Horrible case of cage breeding. They had, from what I understand, over 125 Persian cats, 60 of which were saved. So some of them passed away. 60 of which were saved and able to be adopted. And Abby was one of them. In fact, they called her Belle and had posted a news article online that said Belle needs a castle to call her own. And when I went down there to look at some of these Persian cats, Abby was not actually the first one I had my eye on. She was smaller, real timid, had a lot of health problems. She had cysts in her ears. She had damage to one of her eyes from repeated eye infections. But I was drawn to her. I kept going back to her kennel and looking at her. And I went home that night to think about it and just felt in my heart that she was the one and went back the next day to adopt her. Abby came to me after a recent loss of my cat, whose name was James. He was a tuxedo cat, and he was 16 years old. He passed from complications of feline diabetes. And honestly, he was the first cat I had in my adult life. And I decided I wanted to research that and kind of see what might be causing so many cases of diabetes. I had been reading about so many, and was it environmental? Was it the food we're feeding them? Was it genetic? And through the research that I did my own self, just my own reading, I was kind of convinced that it was the foods that we were feeding them, and I didn't know much about feline nutrition, so I dove into that. And during my research, that's when I found NHV and their supplements. So I reached out to the ladies at NHV, and they were very helpful. And the first supplement I got for all of my cats was one called Multi-Essentials. I felt really comfortable with that. I think it just kind of filled in the gaps for what the foods that I had chosen, and the food I had chosen was actually a higher quality food at that point. But, I work full-time and I don't have time to feed my cats a raw diet or cook for them, which is likely the most ideal, but I didn't have time for that. So I had to choose a cat food, and even with the higher quality foods, in my opinion, I think there were gaps, nutritional voids. I felt really confident that the Multi-Essentials was filling in those gaps. So that was the first supplement that I reached for and used for these cats. So when I first got Abby home, one of the things that immediately started to happen was she had real weepy eyes. In fact, oftentimes the weeping would develop into an eye infection, and we were back and forth to the vet for a few months, and apparently it's very common in the breed. That's what I was told, and Abby was on various drops for bacterial infections, for viral infections, and these things would work. They would clear her up, but then, a few weeks later it would begin again, and it was just a vicious cycle. So that's when I found that NHV had one called eye ease. I honestly wasn't real confident at first that this was going to work, because if the eye drops the veterinarian was prescribing weren't really working to keep this away consistently, I didn't really see how an herbal supplement was going to, but I thought, well, it can't hurt, and so we tried it. What I found was shocking. Abby really never, throughout the rest of her life, suffered from any eye weeping or eye infections. It completely cleared it up. In fact, her veterinarian said, if it works, keep it up. She looks great. And so eye ease became a regular part of her routine. As she got older, her eye weeping seemed to disappear somewhat. So eye ease became something that we didn't have to use as often. But any time that she would have a flare up, we'd continue to give it to her. It was just an amazing supplement. It really does work. And I was just so satisfied and so happy with the fact that I had found that. It made her life much more comfortable. For the rough start that Abby had, I was really shocked that she came around so quickly. I mean, for a cat that spent the first 3 years of her life in a hard iron crate, just being a number, just breeding litter after litter, I was so surprised that she trusted me as soon as she did. I mean, it was within the week. I'm going to say about 4 days into her life, her new life home with me. She was up on the bed, purring, following me around. She was probably the friendliest cat I've ever had, and more attached to me than any feline I have ever known in my life. I mean, almost undescribable how attached to me she was. Constantly wanted to touch my face. In fact, she would do that every morning, and every now and then a claw would slip out, and I remember I'd pull the covers over my face because it got a little annoying, quite honestly. She wanted to do it so much, and I remember laying there thinking one night, I'm gonna miss this. when the years pass and Abby's no longer with me, so I should just allow it. And now thinking back, I'd give anything to just have one more day where she was doing that. But it was a routine every morning. Abby, in fact, traveled really well. I would always take her to PetSmart and keep her in the cart. She went on hikes with me in a special backpack made just for her, and we'd sit up at the top of the mountain, weather permitting, and watch the sunset, and she just loved it. When Abby was about 9 years old, we went to her annual checkup. I always made sure she had one, and she looked great, but this was the first time that the veterinarian had actually heard a heart murmur, and she said, since this is something new, I definitely would recommend you see a veterinary cardiologist. And so we did, and that's when Abby was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It is a progressive disease, so it was expected to progress, and that wasn't great news, but hers was so mild at the time, they didn't even recommend medications, so I was happy about that. So I came home and reached out to NHV, and we put Abby on a supplement called Hearty Heart. Abby always took her supplements really well. I would disguise them in her food, and she was a good eater, so that worked well. Abby, fast forward to a year after the diagnosis, she had a follow-up echocardiogram, and there was absolutely no progression. This happened 2 years in a row, no progression at all. And I remember saying to the veterinarian, she's on this supplement. What do you think are the chances that this has kept the disease from progressing? And she said, I would say that is very likely. And so again, I was really happy and really confident in my choice to keep her on Hearty Heart, because throughout Abby's life, that disease actually never progressed. In the fall of 2023, Abby was diagnosed, sadly, with mammary cancer. I did have the mass removed. When they removed it, they had notated that they had got a clean removal and the margins were clear, but unfortunately, the cancer had spread to her intestines. We didn't realize that at the time. Cancer, in the end, was what took Abby's life. They do think that the disease was likely caused because of her background. She was used for breeding, and I guess a lot of times if cats are spayed before their first heat cycle, it can diminish their chances of, or really reduce, I should say, their chances of getting cancer. But of course I didn't know that, and Abby wasn't adopted until she was 6 years old. The evening that Abby passed away, I actually had told her that I was going to advocate for her for the rest of my life for as long as I was able. Number one, for spaying and neutering. I just feel that's really important. I think the cancer that took Abby's life can be greatly reduced by having a cat spayed before their first heat cycle. So I've reached out to many organizations, the Arizona Humane Society included. They did a lovely dedication to her life that they aired on TV just this past week, in fact, and it was very heartfelt and I loved it. Anyways, I really appreciate you guys doing this for me. It means a lot, and your company just actually means so much to me. I mean, I can't even put in words how much faith and how much I appreciate you guys. And another thing that has really meant a lot to me is at one point in time, I had reached out to you because Abby also had some allergies throughout her life, and I can't remember what supplement I had my eye on, but I had reached out and asked you about it, and I was about to order it, and you guys were like, no, you need to use Stimune. So I love the fact that, I was kind of redirected to the right one. We didn't use Stimune for very long because I noticed Abby's allergies were really trigger-based. So I quit burning candles and using aerosol sprays and mopping the floor with bleach, things like that, because that reduced it a lot. But Stimune did help, and I love the fact that you guys, listen and you know exactly what to recommend and what might be good for certain situations and, et cetera, et cetera. I just wanted to thank you guys for everything that you did. How much I appreciate you guys.